feel like there is a misconception out there that all cloudy days are the best days to go out and catch a bass. And while cloudy days can be good, those days also really change the bass. And so today, I want to give you 5 tips that will help you to understand how bass change with the clouds and how you can catch them. So stay tuned, it's gonna be a good one. This video is brought to you by the Deep Dive app. Once you download this app, you can actually select the lake that you are going to be fishing. You can input data like water temperature, water clarity, whether you're fishing around a lot of vegetation or not, and if you're fishing in a windy or protected area. Once you input this data, the app is going to spit out some strategies and lures that you can use to start attacking that exact body of water that you are fishing. There's a paid version and a free version, and if you would like to download the app, you can click the link down below in the description, and you are greatly going to help support the Bass Fishing HQ channel. Like I kind of talked about in the intro, I really feel like growing up, I would read hundreds of different articles or watch Bassmaster TV shows, and you hear a lot of guys talk about how cloudy days are great for bass fishing. And after traveling in a lot of different states, I mean, anywhere from Florida to New York to Mississippi, all across the nation, I've experienced a lot of days on the water where I'm facing cloudy conditions. And I have found that there are certain lakes that cloudy conditions are absolutely great for, and there's also certain lakes where you have cloudy conditions and it can be extremely difficult to locate the bass. But if you learn how to take advantage of the clouds, you can catch fish extremely quick on these days. And we got some clouds moving in. Speaking of the devil, a lot of times clouds will prolong certain bite windows. For example, we all know as bass fishermen that bass bite really well in the mornings and in the evenings. Those are 2 bite windows that typically happen throughout the year. Now, if you have cloudy conditions, especially in the morning, a lot of times that bite window in the morning will be extended by several hours. So if you are catching fish in the morning on a topwater on certain points, you may be able to catch them for a lot longer simply because of those clouds. Another bite window that can be prolonged by clouds is when you are dealing with a shad spawn. If you live in a part of the country where you have a lot of threadfin or gizzard shad, typically during April, May, or June, they will spawn. Now, while the shad are spawning, they are very active in the mornings, and this is when the bass typically take advantage of them. But when you have cloudy conditions, that can prolong the bite for almost the entire day. I've seen days on the water before where you're on a shad spawn bite, but you actually are catching fish all day long that are relating to that shad spawn just because you have those clouds. So understanding that the clouds will prolong bites at times can really help you to take advantage of that bite window when it's happening. Now, the second big tip that I want to give you when it comes to fishing in the clouds is that you really have to understand that the clouds will position fish a lot differently. And sometimes this is for your advantage, but sometimes this can be a really big disadvantage. Now, typically, oh man, here comes rain. Dang it. Timeout. Well, here we are. Had to pull out of the water because it was seriously monsooning out here just a minute ago. Depending on what type of body of water you are fishing and what type of cover you are fishing, this can really change a lot. For example, I love to fish heavy cover for bass. It's one of my favorite things to do, whether that's frogging on a mat or flipping lily pads or fishing a deep brush pile. Now, the big thing about fishing heavy cover is it is typically the sunlight that pushes fish into that heavy cover. So a lot of times if you don't have that sun, you don't have anything that's pushing bass in there. So if you're on a really strong heavy cover bite, whatever it may be, it can completely die if you have cloudy conditions. I've not only seen this with heavy cover, but I've also seen this with just certain structure elements down on the bottom. For example, I fish a lot of rock piles where I'm fishing rock piles for smallmouth, and there are certain little rock clusters where those bass tend to hang out. But when you have those cloudy conditions, it really pulls those fish off the rock. They will roam a lot more. They won't really confine to a certain little rock pile because they can really get around and roam. And that's one of the biggest things that you see happen to the bass on cloudy days is they simply start roaming. I was fishing a tournament a few years ago on Lake Hartwell down in South Carolina. And in this tournament, I was fishing brush piles with a topwater bait. Now, during the first day of this tournament, it was really sunny. Those fish really positioned close to those brush piles, and I was able to catch them. I had a great day. I was sitting in like 15th place after the first day. Now, during the second day of that tournament, it was extremely cloudy, and it really pulled those fish out of those brush piles. And I didn't have forward-facing sonar, and I really wasn't able to see kind of where those fish were. I tried idling to find them, but the thing was is that those fish didn't go that far, but they pulled off about 30 or 40 yards from those brush piles. And if you had forward-facing sonar, you could actually see kind of where those fish are and still fire topwater over them and catch them. Now for me, I didn't have that technology. Those fish weren't relating to those piles as tight, and it was a really difficult day for me. On the flip side of things, sometimes during cloudy conditions, you will have fish that aren't normally shallow move shallow and really start feeding. A lot of times if I am fishing kind of sparse grass clumps, maybe on a big grass flat, this is actually one of the best times to go out there and fish baits like a chatterbait or a lipless crankbait or a topwater and really catch fish that are moving up onto the flat and are very active in feeding up. A couple of years ago, I was fishing Cherokee Lake down in Tennessee, and I was on a really strong dock bite with a big swim bait. But of course, the first day of a tournament, we have super cloudy conditions, super rainy conditions, and I was not able to catch fish on docks, and I was getting a lot of big bites, and that completely went away. But what I found is that some bass started relating to different road beds that were really close to these docks. If I could find a road bed or a boat ramp going into the water, that is where those fish started roaming to. They didn't need the cover from the boat dock anymore. They could go over to the boat ramp and start feeding up. Now, the third tip when it comes to catching bass on cloudy days is really understanding the prey that the bass are eating that you are fishing for, because this is going to be different depending on what body of water you are fishing for. For example, I have found that bass that are really bait fish oriented, if they are eating shad or herring or minnows or alewives, if they are really bait fish oriented bass, when you have sunny conditions, those bass can see those bait fish a lot easier. So a lot of times when you have the sun, those fish are really actively feeding on those bait fish. They're congregating them in little bait balls. They're going through them like marlin out in the sea. I have found that bait fish oriented bass will feed really well in the sun. Now, if you are fishing for those bass that are eating those bait fish and you have cloudy conditions all of a sudden, those fish tend to go from kind of suspending and chasing those fish to actually on the bottom. And this is something that took me kind of years to figure out, is that a lot of those fish, when you're catching them on topwaters and jerk baits, like this happened to me up in Lake Champlain. I was catching them really good when it was sunny on a jerk bait. And as soon as we had some cloudy conditions move in, those fish no longer wanted to chase a jerk bait. And you would think, man, this is prime jerk bait weather, but those fish actually moved to the bottom, and it was a lot easier to start catching them on Ned rigs and drop shots. This exact same thing happened to me in South Carolina. I was fishing a lake down there where these fish were eating herring, and as soon as we had cloudy conditions, those fish went to the bottom, and you started being able to catch these fish on bottom lures like drop shots as opposed to fishing lures like topwater. So to me, the bait fish oriented bass are the ones that get most affected by those cloudy conditions. If you have bass that are feeding primarily on crawfish, a lot of times they're going to be in kind of those same areas. You're going to be able to catch them on the same lures. They just may roam a little bit more. It may not be a specific cast anymore. You might be fishing an offshore hump where you're catching them all over the hump as opposed to that one cast, that single boulder or rock that you were catching them on before. Now, speaking of lures, that actually brings me to my fourth tip when it comes to catching bass on cloudy days. Now, I think that bass will hit moving lures on cloudy days. I think that they will hit bottom lures or more vertical lures on cloudy days as well. I do think that sometimes, kind of like we've talked about, cloud will change their behavior. I don't think there's a very specific thing as to, hey, you have to do this or you have to do that. I just think that you have to realize that bass will change. You'll have bass that were eating horizontal lures like jerk baits and topwaters. All of a sudden they want a bottom lure. And sometimes it's the exact opposite. There are times where you're fishing grass flats where you had to flip and throw a vertical lure to catch that bass. And now all of a sudden you can catch them on a chatterbait or a lipless crankbait. Now, the one thing that I do typically do with my lures on cloudy days is I tend to use darker colored lures. Instead of using maybe a green pumpkin, I might switch over to a straight black. Instead of using a chatterbait that was white in color, I might also switch over to a black or black and blue. I just feel like a lot of times on cloudy days, you tend to get more bites on those dark colored lures. Now, the fifth tip when it comes to catching bass on cloudy days is what I've been dealing with today, and that is actually dealing with rain. Now, having a cloudy day is one thing, but having a rainy cloudy day is a totally different thing. And I actually made a full video that I'm gonna link right here that talks about how to catch bass before, during, and after a rainstorm. So if you guys enjoyed this video, I think you will like this one as well. Please don't forget to subscribe, comment below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.